Hey everyone, I'm Simone Boyce in for Allison Morris. You're watching NBC News Now. Here's what's happening.
This is like a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, so you just want to soak it up. But, you know, with everything going on, you obviously still want to be safe.
Let the games begin. The Tokyo Summer Olympics officially kicking off today with an opening ceremony like no other. What it's like in Japan's capital city as COVID cases there continue to climb.
It's time that vaccinated, responsible individuals have to stop paying the price for people that refuse to follow science and follow the data.
And the U.S. also seeing a concerning spike in COVID cases in every single state. We're taking you to one vacation hotspot where 70% of the recently diagnosed COVID cases are among fully vaccinated people. And unimpressed with your credit score? CNBC personal finance reporter Sharon Epperson has a score just 1% shy, 1 point shy of perfect. She joins us this hour to tell us how she did it. Japan's prime minister says the Olympics will be a success despite COVID concerns. NBC News senior international correspondent Keir Simmons sat down with the PM.
Hey Simone, ahead of that spectacular opening ceremony celebrating the history of Japan, we've been traveling across this country to some of Japan's most historic sites, like this temple in Kyoto, and talking to the people here, beginning with Japan's Prime Minister, who gave his first US television interview. At this morning's Olympic opening ceremony, First Lady Jill Biden and the American delegation were hosted by Japan's Prime Minister. He told us her attendance at the Games underscores Japan's close relationship with the US.
I am incredibly pleased to have the First Lady come to Japan and want to welcome her warmly.
But polls have shown many Japanese people oppose the Games.
What worried me the most was that the public opinion was divided.
There's a huge weight on your shoulders. Are the Olympics worth it?
Overcoming the hardship of the coronavirus and to be able to hold the Games, I think there is real value in that.
To speak to people ourselves, we left Tokyo this week, traveling across the country. In Hiroshima, we met Charisse Encarnacion.
You were in California till 7 months ago. Now you're living here.
Correct.
How does it compare?
There's definitely a lot more rules and regulations.
This city knows what it means to overcome adversity. This building, the only one left standing after an American atomic bomb hit in 1945. Today, like the rest of the world, the most pressing issue is coronavirus, which has become part of daily life.
It's a balance between normal life and kind of staying indoors, staying home as well.
I'm going to ask you the big question. Do you think the Olympics should be going ahead?
Wow. That's a difficult one.
That's a very controversial question.
We travelled on, stopping at one of Japan's oldest castles, modern Japan's political battles now over COVID and the Olympics.
Do you think the Olympics should go ahead?
We have no choice, he tells me. Finally, we reached Japan's beautiful and ancient capital, Kyoto.
Here, as in Tokyo, there are COVID restrictions, and this internationally famous destination for tourists has been suffering financially without the support of overseas visitors. Normally, these ancient streets would be packed with people from around the world.
Back in Tokyo, the Prime Minister telling me he hopes the Games will send a message to the world.
How many medals will Japan win? More than Team USA?
I hadn't thought about that.
Never gave it a thought. It's the most important question.
We want to share the medals with everyone.
Simone, for the Olympics, the Japanese government has made these few days a national holiday. We were out on the streets of Kyoto today. There were many local folks. Not so much tonight. You have to imagine some, at least, were at home watching that opening ceremony with no small amount of pride. Simone?
Well, it's already an Olympics unlike any other. This year, the athletes and people who live in Tokyo are clearing a whole new set of hurdles. NBC correspondent Stephanie Goss takes us behind the scenes to show us what it's like to host and attend the Games during a pandemic.
Here in Tokyo, there's a new Olympic event. Everyone from athletes to coaches to correspondents and anchors going for gold. And it starts the minute you touch down at the airport.
We finally made it, and now begins the COVID protocol.
Everyone arriving in Tokyo for the Games is required to pass through a COVID obstacle course made up of several COVID checkpoints, a test on site, and waiting for the results. Once cleared, athletes grab their credentials and head to the Olympic Village, where they are tested daily.
All right, so we just got to the Olympic Village.
Men's volleyball player Eric Shoji capturing long lines inside.
There's my credential, yay.
We start our day spitting in a tube for a COVID test, and then we head to the breakfast dining hall.
Inside the village dining halls, sanitizing is a must. Australian water polo player Tilly Kearns showing what it's like to sit down for a meal with her teammates.
In every little cubicle, there are disinfectant wipes, so we wipe down everything that we're going to touch, the screen, the sides, the chair, everything.
Athletes separated by plastic barriers, and once masks are off, they're encouraged to make their meal as short as possible.
These gyozas are bomb.
Many Olympians still making the most of this once-in-a-lifetime experience, even with the challenges.
The village has fun, interactive things where we can go and hang out. We wrote little notes to Japanese students, and then we headed into the post office to take some pictures.
USA wrestlers passing time between training and events with card games. Women's volleyball showing off their Team USA gear for fans. Gymnast Suni Lee and Jordan Childs giving us a look at their morning routines. And others taking a quick chance to be tourists, posing with the Olympic rings in Tokyo Bay.
The highlight of my day is waking up in the morning and coming out on this balcony. Just check out the view.
Like everyone else, I am on the 2-week quarantine. We are allowed one 15-minute walkabout every day.
I like to come to this Shinto shrine for a little peace amidst the madness. That building above me is the Fuji headquarters. The orb is an observation deck and probably the first thing Godzilla grabs when he attacks the city.
Back inside, you have to take a temperature check. The rest of the day, the trick is staying active indoors.
Oh my God! What do you do here? Power walk. It's a quarantine walk. Let's go. Come on, hurry up.
Savannah and Natalie have the idea. I did score a terrific trip organized by the city government for the media, a special boat ride in Tokyo Bay.
I'm in Japan for about 3 weeks, which means that my quarantine is up and I have a week left, a golden week where I can actually get out, walk around the streets, eat some food, see some people. Until then, this is my view, which is pretty nice.
Traveling is heavily restricted for locals and fans here, too. Organizers eliminated public viewing areas. And like we've seen all week, events and games will continue to be played without fans.
I'm still excited. I'm trying to be very hopeful, even though we can't go to any of the events.
Vacation hotspots are seeing a jump in COVID cases as more Americans get away this summer. Let's take a look at Massachusetts. Cases there are up 258% with 477 new cases Thursday. And now some in the popular Cape Cod area are telling vacationers, if you're not vaccinated, you're not welcome.
Going into the season, it was a bit surprising to see so many fully vaccinated people testing positive, to the point where we are all really concerned about what this means long term.
NBC News correspondent Antonia Hilton joins me now from Provincetown, Massachusetts. Antonia, health officials in this state are linking this cluster of COVID cases there to the 4th of July. But here is what I find surprising. The majority of these cases are among the vaccinated. Now, we know that vaccinated breakthrough cases exist, that we should expect them. But does this surge seem abnormally high? And do you have any guesses as to why this is happening?
So I had a conversation with the town manager of Provincetown, Alex Morse, this morning about all of this. And just as you described, they pin it to the 4th of July. And what they describe is that there were large numbers of unvaccinated people coming here, partying, that there were long lines to get into every bar and venue here, and that ultimately those unvaccinated people mixed and socialized for days on end with vaccinated people and local residents here. And they believe that essentially those unvaccinated people are responsible for passing the virus off to people who live here. And this is, Simone, I mean, Massachusetts is one of the most vaccinated states in the country right now, but this area, Cape Cod, is the most vaccinated part of Massachusetts. So people here are a bit angry. They feel like, you know, we followed the science. We listened to our doctors. We went out and got the shots. And then our lives were put at risk by people who came here, who we welcomed here, but who did not choose to get vaccinated. I want you to take a listen to my conversation with the town manager, Alex Morse, that happened earlier this morning.
I think it's just frankly irresponsible, not just here in Provincetown, but across the country. And it's time that vaccinated, responsible individuals have to stop paying the price for people that refuse to follow science and follow the data. And Provincetown has always taken the lead on facts and the data and science, and we're not going to stop doing that.
The county has now, or the town here has put in a mask advisory. So not yet a mandate, but an advisory asking people now to please wear their masks indoors at venues and to even wear their masks outdoors when social distancing isn't possible, in the hopes that what they saw happen on July 4th does not happen again, Simone.
All right, so you mentioned a couple of the things that local officials are doing there to try to contain this cluster, but I imagine that business owners and even residents, they've got to be frustrated considering how much they've committed to getting vaccinated and just what they've been through over the past year or so. So how are they reacting to this, and are they concerned that this is going to hurt business and deter more tourists from coming?
There is serious concern around that. I mean, they're worried that people are going to just watch the news, hear about the Delta variant, become afraid and cancel their vacations, when their real message is not cancel your vacation and don't come to P-Town. It's really the opposite. Please come here and be a part of our community, but please get vaccinated, not just for health and safety of all the people that you're around, but out of respect for businesses that fought over this really difficult year to stay afloat and to be able to welcome people back here. And, you know, there's another element here to the concern of these businesses, because this is a community that serves a LGBTQ population. It is known to be friendly to LGBTQ couples, individuals, and families. In fact, this coming week, there's a whole celebration around LGBTQ families, and they don't want there to be a stigma. You know, many people here were personally connected to the AIDS epidemic, and they don't want now this outbreak to be a part of their story. Take a listen to a conversation that I had actually with a person who works in hospitality here and who also worked at an AIDS nonprofit. His name's Joe Carr.
Provincetown has always been a place where it's different. People are different. We have artists. We have a huge gay population. We're extremely welcoming. But we also went through an epidemic that devastated this town. We're in the shadow of the AIDS epidemic, AIDS monument right here, and I feel like it brings back memories in a very not good way to think that folks are afraid to come here again 30 years later because of COVID, when we did so much to prevent COVID from being here. So if I were to have a message, it would just be, come to Provincetown. We're okay.
In an effort to protect the community here, some business owners are actually taking things a step further and requiring a zero tolerance policy. They want to see proof of vaccination from all their guests. And one business owner down the street told me that if you aren't vaccinated, you are not going to be able to stay or eat at his hotel. Simone.
Doing what they got to do there to stay safe and keep business open. Antonia, thank you so much. Minnesota Vikings assistant coach Rick Dennison has reportedly lost his job because he refused to get the COVID vaccine. That's according to ESPN. Now, he's been with the team since 2019. Joining me now is Yahoo Sports senior NFL reporter Charles Robinson. Charles, thanks so much for being with us. The Vikings haven't made an official announcement yet, but we know that the NFL requires all coaches to be fully vaccinated unless they have a valid medical reason. So tell us more about this NFL policy for coaches and how it played out in this case.
Right. Well, unlike players, coaching staffs, auxiliary staff, support staff, essentially the staff that makes up NFL teams, they don't have a pass to not get vaccinated for COVID-19, particularly any individuals who have tier 1 access, which is direct access to players. The league has mandated that you have to get a vaccine if you're going to have tier 1 access. And if you're a coach who has tier 1 access and will not get a vaccination, there's no free pass for you there. You are going to be held to a standard in which you cannot take part in the 2021 season. Now, the Minnesota Vikings have said that they're still talking to Rick Dennison, that they've made him aware of the fact that there is a mandate, he has to get the vaccine, and thus far he will not do that. So as it stands, Rick Dennison will not be coaching for the Minnesota Vikings in the 2021 season, but he's not alone. Co-offensive coordinator Cole Popovich for the New England Patriots as well, has refused to be vaccinated and also now appears to be on the verge of missing the 2021 season for the New England Patriots. I don't think this is going to be the last coach or coaches that we see this happen to as camps open up and teams start to recognize that there are certain tier 1 individuals who are not going to take part in that mandate and still will not get vaccinated.
And Charles, let's focus on the players here for a minute. So the NFL says 80% of all players have been vaccinated, but they're not mandating it for players. And the league just sent a memo to all teams saying that they may have to forfeit games if there are outbreaks among unvaccinated players. Like Cardinals star wide receiver DeAndre Hopkins deleted a tweet actually saying that he would, quote, question his future in the NFL over this rule. So, I mean, obviously there's going to be some controversy over a rule like this. What kind of signal is the league sending here?
Well, Simone, it's pretty clear that the league has now gotten to a point where it's drawing a very clear line, and a punitive line in the sand for players, whereas there have been other tiers of trying to educate players, making any data available, having an open door policy for players to talk with the league and league medical officials and pretty much anyone they wanted about the safety measures in place and the realities of the vaccination. They went beyond that and tried to say, look, we will also soften COVID protocols around your teams. If you're willing to get vaccinated, your life is going to be made easier inside the NFL. And yet they still have struggled to meet this 85% threshold they would like across the league, every team to have 85% vaccination. Ultimately, the memo you spoke of, that was just the NFL saying, look, we're now at a point where we have no other options. It has to get punitive, and the punitive measures are going to be players on both teams. If a schedule disruption occurs, not only will a team that causes the schedule disruption to occur lose that game, ultimately suffer a forfeit, the NFL owner of that team will be subject to paying the finances of the opposing team for that week, and players from both teams will lose their game checks. This is about as punitive as it gets for the NFL, and I think you could use the terminology that the NFL now is pushing players toward vaccination.
Well, we'll have to see what happens here. Thank you so much, Charles.
What is it going to take to get people to get shots in arms?
I don't know. You tell me. Folks supposed to have common sense. But it's time to start blaming the unvaccinated folks, not the regular folks. It's the unvaccinated folks that are letting us down.
Alabama Republican Governor Kay Ivey saying it's time to start blaming the unvaccinated for keeping this pandemic going. Her state is one of the least vaccinated in the country, but is America getting unvaccinated people all wrong? I want to bring in Jessica Malati Rivera. She's an infectious disease epidemiologist and science communication lead at the COVID Tracking Project. Jessica, your skilled communication around this pandemic has helped so many of us better understand what's going on and also better understand how to communicate with people in our own lives about this. So, there is this tendency to assume that all unvaccinated people are anti-vaxxers, but that's not necessarily the case. And you have said that we need to be approaching our relationships with people who are unvaccinated with empathy. Why is that?
Thanks so much for bringing this up. It's super important in this critical time in the pandemic. If we start thinking in groups and grouping people and labeling people, we cause more harm and can make vaccine confidence and trust an even harder goal to achieve, namely because those who have not been vaccinated yet haven't for a multitude of reasons, right? When we speak about the anti-vaccine population, they're loud, but they're a minority of the population. We are still dealing with, this far into the game, issues of accessibility, which is not the same same thing as availability. We know that you can walk into most places and get a vaccine quite easily, but there are still some people who have barriers because of misinformation, barriers because of lack of childcare or lack of a ride or the ability to go or paid sick leave or even having legitimate medical mistrust because of historic or current trauma. These are all the kind of nuances that need to be included in how we talk about vaccines and how we talk about rebuilding trust, because they're not all feeling the same things. And that's why it's not a one-size-fits-all message. And we need that empathy and that patience to grow with people, to listen to those concerns and walk them to the truth.
Jessica, I've been following you on social media, and I've seen the things that you have said about communications during this pandemic, and specifically science communications and the way that the language that we should be using. And it's been so heartwarming to see some responses that you've posted from some of your followers who said, I've actually applied your techniques with the unvaccinated people in my life, and it actually worked. I was able to change hearts and minds. So you're saying that this can actually be an effective way to reach the unvaccinated. What are your tips for people who would like to try this with their own friends and family?
It absolutely can work. I have seen fruit, unexpected fruit from the work that I do on social media. And I think primarily is to lead with empathy, like you mentioned, and to listen first, ask questions, and don't try to win, right? I think that right now we have to recognize that pandemics are scary. This is an extremely, uncertain time for a lot of people. I understand that my kind of distress tolerance for this is quite high because I've been studying this and I've been working in this space for quite a while. But for a lot of people, this is still very disorienting. It's emotionally upsetting. It's, professionally really, really catastrophic. And so because of all these kinds of triggers and stress influences, it's really hard to feel like you can make an informed choice, especially because right now we're truly dealing with an infodemic, which is not just misinformation and disinformation, right? An infodemic just means too much information. And people have a hard time parsing through that. So by listening and helping people feel heard, you can have a lot more breakthroughs with folks who are coming in with doubts and hesitations.
The reality is it feels like we are entering a pretty scary season with the surge of cases that we're seeing this summer, the surge of variants like the Delta variant. So I want to talk about what do we do going forward? Do you agree with the CDC guidance that masking for vaccinated people is an individual choice, or do you think that there should be stricter guidelines even for folks who are vaccinated?
I've gone on the record a few times in the last few weeks and even in the last few months saying that I found that changing policies on kind of the national level and even in my state, California, very premature, mostly because we are not near the kinds of thresholds that we need to be at with vaccination. And this happened kind of in the midst of new and more transmissible variants emerging. And you kind of have to think about the risk calculus here. It just really wasn't in the right place. And I do think that we need to be encouraging folks to continue to exercise caution, even if you are vaccinated, without making people feel like there's this false dichotomy, right? I think a lot of people now are falling into this trap of thinking, well, what's the point of getting vaccinated if I still have to wear a mask? Or what's the point of wearing a mask if, this doesn't actually change anything for vaccines? I think that right now what we're realizing is that we are very much in the middle of the pandemic, and we're trying to vaccinate in the middle of the pandemic, which is very different than trying to get ahead of something, kind of like how we do for flu season, anticipating flu when we all get vaccinated to prevent it. We are trying to do damage control right now in the middle of a public health emergency. And it means that we have to be calibrating our mitigation efforts and not eliminating them to make people feel a little bit better. I think that we still have a long way to go, and masks are the bare minimum.
So many great takeaways from our conversation today. Jessica, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
All right, everybody, it's time for The Bottom Line, our daily look at what's going on in the business world and beyond. Today, we're talking credit scores. A good one can get you a lot of things that you probably want, better terms and lower interest rates on loans and credit cards. So how do you get a perfect score? Let's bring in CNBC senior personal finance correspondent Sharon Epperson. Sharon, you're killing it. You have a very impressive FICO credit score at 849. We're talking just 1 point shy of a perfect credit score. So have you been an overachiever your whole life? And how did you achieve this?
Simone, how do you know me so well? We just met. Well, yes, I have been an overachiever for much of my life, but I've also had a long credit history, and I've had a lot of time to make some mistakes and then to fix those mistakes and get on a better path to get a better credit score.
So that's so interesting that you said that you do have some mistakes credit-wise in your past, but you were able to move past those. Because my impression is that it's really hard to bring your credit score back up after it's been docked. It's easier to just maintain a higher score. So what actually goes into the calculus here, and what's typically the range that people want to be in?
So the range for a FICO credit score is between 300 and 850. Most people are between 600, 750, and a good score is anything over 700. The average score last year was about 710. Now, what happens and how you can improve that score is keep in mind when there is something negative in your credit history, over the years it drops off. After about 7 years, those extremely negative items, they eventually start to fall off. So that is the good thing to know. And there's several ways that you can boost your credit score. First of all, you got to know what goes into it. And one of the most important things is your payment history, making sure that you pay your bills on time. And if you can pay them in full, that's even better. The other thing is to keep in mind that there is the credit usage that a lot of people are looking at. They want to know, you're so excited that you got a credit limit of $10,000 and you want to use most of that. Not a great idea. The way to keep your score in check and the way to actually boost your score is to keep that usage below 30%, ideally to boost the score below 10%. So if you have a $10,000 credit limit, you don't want to use any more than $3,000. Better yet, use less than $1,000 of that. Might seem counterintuitive. Why am I getting the credit card in the first place? But that's the way to boost your credit score, one of the key ways.
So how long does it actually take to recover from some of these mistakes that people make that bring down their credit score?
Well, I would say that it took me about a year or two to get my credit score up maybe 100 points or so. There are various things that happen that can lower that score at a certain time. You have a number of credit inquiries because you're trying to refinance your mortgage or get a mortgage. You wanted to get a new credit card, and so you had an inquiry for that. Those can lower your credit score. Also, again, that mix of what you're using in terms of credit, mortgages and car loans versus credit cards. They want to see a nice mix there. And then when I'm talking about the credit usage, it's not just for one card. They're looking at the usage that you have for all of your cards. So you may have maxed out one and then one that you're pretty good with, but they're mixing it all together and looking at how you're doing that. And so that can influence your score. I think what helped me was that I had a 0% interest rate credit card at the beginning of the pandemic. I was like, I'm going to use this, pay off some of the, credit that I had that was at a higher rate. And when that 0% was going to go back up, I was like, I got to pay this off in full. So being able to pay that credit card off in full brought my credit usage down to 1%. And having 1% for credit usage, I think, is what really took me close to that 850 mark, 1 point shy. And I still can't figure out how to get that extra point.
Well, I think you're doing all right, Sharon. Sharon, I just want to wrap up with this. Your story is so inspiring to so many people who have, a lower credit score kind of hanging over their head like a dark cloud. So how does it feel to actually be here now? Talk about just the emotional transformation and mental transformation that it brings you when you reach this point.
Well, I talked to experts for my whole career as a personal finance correspondent about what to do to be better about my money. And I actually listened. And I try to do some of the things they said. And this time I actually called one of those credit experts and I said, I got to tell you this. It might seem really geeky that I'm so excited, but I have to tell you what just happened. And he got it, because all of the things that he'd said, and particularly that credit usage, because that really threw me when I first learned about it, it really does work. So it made me feel great that what I've been reporting has actually paid off in my own life.
Hey, it's not geeky at all. This is real life stuff, very practical life advice that you're helping us through today. So, Sharon, thank you so much.
Thanks, Simone.
Well, the Dow ending the week on a high note, closing up nearly 240 points today and above 35,000 for the first time ever, bringing its gain for 2021 to more than 14%. The S&P 500 and the Nasdaq also making major gains today. Strong earnings from tech stocks made investors optimistic ahead of reports next week from the biggest names in that sector. All three U.S. stock averages closed the week in the green, rebounding from last week's losses and Monday's sharp sell-off. Well, a manhunt is underway for several suspects after a shooting in Washington, D.C. 2 people were wounded when gunfire erupted at a busy street during peak dinner hours, sending diners scrambling for cover. NBC News correspondent Josh Letterman joins me now in D.C. with the latest developments. Josh, thank you so much for being with us. This shooting, it broke out on a street that's really popular with lots of restaurants and bars, and a lot of people were out at the time. So walk us through how this unfolded.
Yeah, you're right, Simone. On a Thursday night, this is where Washington comes to party, to have a nice dinner or go out with friends for some cocktails. Police responding within 5 seconds to what witnesses say were as many as 30 shots. 2 suspects believed to have been involved in that shooting. They disappeared into a black sedan that then sped off down this street. That was the last time that sedan was spotted. We know there were at least 2 people who were shot. One of them who apparently was the target of this shooting. The other, police at this point believe, was caught in the crossfire. Both of them are recovering in the hospital.
And Josh, police say that they're searching for several suspects. Who are they looking for? Do they know who they're looking for? What do we know about them so far?
Well, all we really know is that there were 2 males. One was wearing a yellow hoodie. The other was wearing a black hoodie, who are the suspects who were seen on video from multiple angles, captured as they were getting back into that sedan and speeding away. At this point, I asked Police Chief Robert Conde just a little bit ago, there's cameras everywhere here. How is it possible that at this point we don't even at least have a license plate or something? He said, look, car was probably stolen. This is not an episode of Law and Order where a crime gets solved in an hour. But Police Chief Conte also with some very strong words about why Washington continues, Simone, to see these kinds of harrowing incidents and why this problem is so hard to solve. Take a listen.
I've been in this city for 30 years. I've been in this city all my life, but I've been in this police department for over 30 years. This is the same movie. This is the same movie that when I was a boy growing up here, the same movie. When are we going to do something different? And what different looks like, what does not happen here is accountability. We're not ready. People are not ready to have that conversation.
The police chief also pointing out, Simone, that he has been given full authorization by Mayor Bowser to use whatever overtime is necessary to try to surge resources. But he says, look, they're down 200 officers. He can't work his folks to death. They need more resources if the city is really going to put its money where its mouth is and try to address this growing problem.
Wow, that clip from that presser was really heartbreaking because you can just hear the passion and frustration in his voice. Josh, thank you so much. Well, the U.S. still launching airstrikes against the Taliban, even as the mission in Afghanistan winds down. NBC News Pentagon correspondent Courtney Cuba joins me now. Courtney, you're reporting that there have been at least 6 airstrikes in the last 30 days, as we mentioned, even as this mission there is winding down. So what's going on here? Who are the targets?
So in this case, the targets have been the Taliban. And that's actually what's interesting here is, you mentioned that the mission is winding down. Well, last week, for all intents and purposes, the U.S. military mission there really ended. The general who's been in charge for nearly 3 years, he stepped down, and the vast majority of the U.S. military personnel, equipment, everything are out of that country. There is a very, very small contingent left there, and the mission officially ends August 31st. Well, what we know is now they are continuing to carry out airstrikes against the Taliban. It's a small number. There were 2 on Thursday morning, our time, really, but overnight Wednesday into Thursday. There were 2 down towards Kandahar, which is in southern Afghanistan. They struck Taliban. The Taliban had stolen some vehicles and some equipment, and they struck 2 locations and took out some of those vehicles and equipment that had been taken. But the big question now, Simone, is what happens next? the U.S. military will maintain the authority to keep conducting these strikes against the Taliban until the mission there officially ends on August 31st. But it's not clear what will happen after that. As of now, we do not expect them to have that authority after the 31st of August. They'll only be able to strike al-Qaeda and ISIS targets, but not the Taliban. The question is, will the Biden administration change that? That's one of the big questions we've been asking here, Simone.
Courtney Kube, thank you so much.
Thanks.
Well, a fire at a home believed to be owned by Beyonce and JayZ is being classified as arson. It happened Wednesday night in New Orleans. Police say they also received a call about a suspicious person in the area around the time that the fire broke out. Officials did not say how the fire started or what evidence indicated it was arson. Reps for Beyonce and JayZ did not respond to requests for comment. Switching gears now to some more positive news about the Carters. JayZ making a cameo on Kanye West's new album. Fans packed the Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta last night to get a first listen to Kanye's highly anticipated 10th studio album. It's called Donda, and it's named after his late mother. Audience goers were treated to a JayZ verse on the final track, and people are flipping out online over this, largely because it's the first time the two have featured together since 2016 after a reported feud. Well, it is a new generation of protests and protesters in Cuba. Younger Cubans, with the help of social media, are leading rallies the communist nation has just never seen before. NBC News Now anchor Morgan Radford introduces us to the youth movement.
It was a movement that started organically, out of pain and frustration. Calls for democracy and freedom in Cuba, unlike anything seen since the country's 62-year-old communist regime came to power. Calls spreading far and wide, led by a younger generation armed with something new: social media.
Do you think this movement could have happened without social media?
Not at all. No.
Alejandro Gonzalez and Michael Rodriguez have become famous as Los Pichi Boys, two cousins turned social media sensation, with more than 500,000 followers who have been uploading videos to their Instagram account from users in Cuba so that the world can see what is happening, even when the Cuban government shut down the internet to keep images of protesters from getting out.
And the only thing that they have to defend themselves is the social medias, and they even cut internet so they can show out what is happening inside there.
This movement started on social media, and the young people from Cuba are tired of living under a communist regime where they don't have any future.
I mean, you all have really been doing the job of many reporters, getting information de la isla, from the island, to everyone here in this international community. Are you surprised by the level of feedback and engagement your social media posts have received?
Since the media and the press in Cuba is controlled by the state, they go out in the street in the morning. They do all the protests. They try to film most thing they can at 9, 2, 3, 4 in the morning. That's when they send us the videos, because that's when they have better signal. We go online every single day until 4, 5 in the morning talking to them. And yes, it's a big responsibility, but it's our duty. They made us famous. We need to make them free.
I went back to study and live in Cuba back when I was younger. And when you would talk to people, no one was public in their criticism. And so now to see people in the streets is something I could never have imagined after living there. Could you?
Yeah, never. No, never. I never, and you're saying that now, and I'm getting goosebumps. I always thought that Cuba was going to be free, but I never thought I was going to see it with my own eyes. And when we saw that on Sunday, we were in tears watching what was going on, because you can see an entire island rising up, chanting for freedom.
Those memories make you emotional.
Of course.
Why?
I'm a father. I have two kids, and I will give my life for them. And I don't know what's going to happen for me if I will see my kids like that.
That's why they're meeting with lawmakers to put pressure on the Biden administration, calling for change and a roadmap to help Cubans on the island achieve freedom. And they're not alone. Felice Gorordo co-founded Roots of Hope in Miami, and he says this generation and this movement calls for a new approach. His organization is raising funds and awareness to amplify the voices of young Cubans.
The young people who are the true agents of change are more empowered and more emboldened than ever before. And I truly believe this is the beginning of the end of this Cuban regime.
Why is the younger generation so important to this movement?
The ones leading this charge and that to a great extent have sparked this movement are our Afro-Cuban brothers and sisters. And they are artists that are using their art to inspire a new generation. They are not your typical politicians or activists. And I think it's our responsibility to help amplify those voices and make sure that they're not drowned out in this process.
And they say they're not stopping until everyone is free.
Model, actress, and Cuban activist America Valdez is among the wave of millennials and Gen Z folks who are leading these conversations about Cuba's humanitarian crisis online. She joins me now. America, it is so great to be speaking with you. I have friends from Miami who have sent me your videos. I've been consuming them and digesting them. And I think it's so important here to center Cuban voices in this conversation. You know, we can hear from politicians, but everyone is wondering if they really mean what they're saying or if they're just trying to get voters to turn out for their reelection efforts. So, you know, I want to hear your perspective on where things stand in Cuba right now.
Where things stand, I think they stand in a place that it's just that has been unthinkable for a lot of Cubans for a really long time. A place that has given a lot of us so much hope. You know, I think that the people of Cuba have woken up and they've realized that they run the show. They run the show. And when they all unite and they take to the streets, you see the reactions of the government. The government is freaking out. They don't know how to contain this anymore. It's out of their reach at this point. It's an international movement. And so I think that obviously the people in Cuba they're afraid. The government for decades has been very, very ruthless and will do pretty much anything to keep its control. But they know that the eyes of the world are on the regime right now. And so I think that gives them hope. So I definitely think it's hopeful and it's just, I don't know. I think we're just waiting it out to see what happens. None of us have really much of a plan for this. None of us really expected any of this to even start, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And I want to get your reaction to the news out of Washington, D.C. this week. The Biden administration announcing sanctions on Cuban officials who they say have carried out human rights abuses against protesters. I know that you've spoken about the role of the U.S. in what's happening in Cuba, the role of the U.S. embargo. What do you think about these sanctions? Was it the right move? Was it enough?
I definitely do think it's a step. And it's just the question of whether it's enough. It's complicated because even as a community, there's a lot of different ideas of what people think the U.S. should be doing to help Cuba. There's a lot of people that think that the U.S. should not be doing anything, that the U.S. has no place doing anything. A lot of people also, they want to end the embargo. But I think that an idea that a lot of us Cubans understand is that if you were to end the embargo, there's a really, really high chance that wouldn't really benefit the people. The government has food, it has money to support its people. It just isn't getting to the people by choice of the regime. So even if there wasn't an embargo and Cuba could freely trade and do all these things, you know, there's a really high chance that wouldn't even affect the people. And all that it would do is just create more economic possibility primarily for the government, therefore giving it more oxygen to withstand a longer time in power. So it's complicated. It really is complicated. I personally, I do appreciate these steps that the administration is taking. I personally I've never been a fan of the embargo. But I don't go to the extreme either of saying that I would like a military intervention from the U.S. I would never support that.
America, I wish we had the time right now to properly do this conversation justice. But the great thing is this conversation can continue on social media, which is exactly what you have been doing. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. Patria vida. Thank you.
For more on the uprising in Cuba, tune in to our NBC News Now special, Cuba's Fight for Freedom. It's re-airing tonight at 8 p.m. and 11 p.m. Eastern right here on NBC News Now.
Hey, NBC News viewers, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.